because art is a very safe way of entering into something that is very difficult to talk about many times. I feel like this was instrumental in helping all of these entities into coming into a decision that would be beneficial for everybody.
Hello, and welcome to Art Restart, where we learn from artists who, wherever they work, whatever they make, are shaking up the status quo in their fields and in their communities. I'm Pier Carlo Talenti, the producer and editor of this podcast, a production of the Thomas S. Keenan Institute for the Arts at the University of North Carolina School of the Arts. In this episode, we'll be speaking with clay and fiber artist Anita Fields and with author James McAnally, who's also the executive and artistic director of Counterpublic, an arts and civics organization in St. Louis, Missouri. Now, you want to hear the story of artists truly shaking up the status quo in their community? Oh boy, this is a good one, because this is a story of artists who successfully and responsibly rematriated a sacred site to a tribal nation. Okay, here's a little backstory for you. You've probably maybe heard of the Cahokia Mounds, just 20 minutes outside of St. Louis. It's the largest pre-Columbian site north of Mexico. Not only is it a state historic site, it's also was designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1982. While St. Louis itself was once known as Mound City because of the number of mounds within city limits, but over the years most were razed. Fast forward to 2009, when the Osage Nation, which is in Oklahoma, purchased the top section or tier of Sugarloaf Mound, the last remaining mound within St. Louis city limits. Why? Well, extensive research by historians and archaeologists, including the Osage Nation's Historic Preservation Office, has determined that the Osage are direct descendants of the civilization that built the mounds. The final snag, which was considerable, was that on the other tiers of Sugarloaf Mound, there remained two privately owned homes. One was the property of a pharmaceutical graduate fraternity named Kappa Psi, and the other was owned and occupied by a woman whose grandparents had originally built it. And this is when Counterpublic stepped in, working with the Osage Nation to negotiate the rematriation of the remaining sections of the mound back to Osage Nation. As part of that effort, Counterpublic, which every 3 years produces a 3-month-long, citywide, huge arts festival, situated part of its 2023 exhibition at a site near Sugarloaf and commissioned artists to create work that would engage all St. Louisans in the Sugarloaf's historical and cultural significance. One of the artists commissioned was Anita, who is herself Osage. She created the installation she describes in this interview. Oh, and let's not forget the story's happy ending. In November 2024, just 3 months before this interview, Counterpublic was able to announce that the transfers had been agreed to. The entire mound was now under the sovereignty of the Osage Nation. Okay, now let's hear from the artists. Anita spoke to me from her home in Stillwater, Oklahoma, and James from St. Louis. Not surprisingly, I started off the interview by asking James my main question: why in the world did his arts organization get involved in this rematriation effort?
Yeah, first thing I would say is that when Lee Broughton and I founded Counterpublic as an organization in 2021, we kind of intentionally built this kind of systems change work into our structure, our mission. So entering the 2023 exhibition, the rematriation efforts at Sugarloaf was kind of top of our mind. It's one of our primary priorities as an organization. But I would kind of reframe it like entering the work for me, it was really, understanding the histories of St. Louis's legacy of erasure, displacement of Native peoples, and the destruction of hundreds of mounds in the city and this immediate region. I think understanding the unique nature of Sugarloaf as the last intact mound within the city was kind of a moral obligation, is how I would frame it for myself. Just understanding this sort of precarious nature, the work that the Osage Nation had already begun in purchasing a portion of the mound in 2009, that it felt like the exhibition was the tool or the instrument that we could take action, but it was really just sort of that understanding of the kind of necessity to do something and the opportunity or invitation to do something. So for myself, I think I first began like writing about the mound in an essay in like 2017, 2018 for Art in America. So it's been on my mind for many years. Even before that, it was sort of something I was aware of. I would pass by weekly. It's near where I have lived in St. Louis and worked for many years. So it was something that was kind of there as something that was always a question, like what is the next step here? And then, I don't know the exact moment where it kind of clarified for me, but I will say at some point it switched to sort of like what will happen with this to like what could I do to support this. And I think that led to it being kind of a priority for Counterpublic and really an expansion of what we felt like as an arts organization. It is a bit unorthodox of a kind of project to undertake, but we felt like it was an expansion of what we felt like the exhibition could do and what we as an arts organization could take on as really a core part of our mission.
Could you describe how it was a crucial part of the exhibition?
Yeah, so for our 2023 exhibition, we were really looking at the histories of St. Louis through a lens of repair. So it's been this really central place in American history for kind of all the wrong reasons in a lot of ways. As the gateway to the West, it was really a site in which the settlement of the West and the displacement of Native peoples were really kind of centered here in a particular way. So with the exhibition, we were looking at those histories, but specifically through a lens of repair, rematriation, reparations, the sort of like what could be done now to kind of undo some of those legacies and set up a different future. So in the exhibition of 2023, there were 37 artist commissions, 40 different sites, but Sugarloaf was one of kind of 3 primary hubs where we were thinking like this is something that we are committing to take more long-term generational action with.
And Anita, is that when you got involved with making art on the site? Were you part of that exhibit?
Yes, I was asked by Counterpublic and Risa Puello, one of the curators, to create work for that site. And I asked my son, who is a musician, my youngest son, to create sound for that so that we could collaborate on this project together. And, I entered into it very, very carefully because of the way that Sugarloaf Mound is considered, within the Osage Nation and its meaning for us. So it wasn't something that I took, very lightly. And I know that Counterpublic and Risa had, had done the same, entered into it carefully and did everything they needed to do, to proceed with their work, which included, talking with the Osage Nation and Dr. Hunter, her preservation office. And I took those steps also just to make sure that people understood, from my community, what it is I would be doing there.
Was it your first time visiting the site?
It was not. I had Dr. Hunter's office, the Cultural Preservation Office of the Osage Nation, takes trips to culturally significant and historic sites that are important to us as Osage people. And I had been to that site with one of those trips. And I had been to Cahokia, years before. But as our history in Missouri is becoming clearer and clearer to us through Dr. Hunter's efforts, Sugarloaf Mound was on my list of when I was in that area of, of places that I wanted to visit. And so I had been there a couple of times previous.
And so you talked about entering this carefully. Could you talk about what exactly that meant for you and how you and your son decided to bring your art to the mound? What did you want it to achieve or honor?
Well, I wanted it to honor our ancestors who have been there, who occupied that site. And I also wanted the visitors who were coming to Counterpublic and the community of St. Louis to understand in a clearer way what happens to people when they're displaced, what happens to a tribe when they are moved. We don't just disappear, into nothingness. I mean, we have a thriving, beautiful culture here in Oklahoma where to the current reservation that we have today. This is how we made our way down from St. Louis through a series of treaties. I wanted them to understand that this kind of displacement, causes extreme trauma for people. And so, but within all of that, I wanted to speak to the idea of hope because we are a very alive culture. So my son and I, we met quite a few times and we worked together for a while and decided upon these platforms, these wooden platforms that are used in our community. They are not connected to ceremony or they're not sacred in any way. They are wooden platforms that are found outside during our dances. They're found at camps during, if you're going to enter into a ceremony or go to a home for a dinner, you would find these platforms where people would sit and visit. They're kind of low lying platforms, and they can be, like 4x4, 6x6. They're different sizes. And I have a beautiful memory of them when I was a kid, and I would go around with my grandmother quite a bit to different social functions and ceremonies. And I would remember elders taking a Pendleton blanket, putting it down, sitting on it. And, usually these were found under trees. And I just have this beautiful thought of them. They would be laughing and teasing each other and having a smoke. And maybe they've got, a cold drink with them and visiting, just enjoying each other's company. And so this is how I thought about what I wanted to portray there, the kind of meaning that I wanted to have with that. And so we were asked to create 40 of those, and then they were decorated on the top with Osage ribbon work designs. And these designs are also indicative and symbolize our worldview, which is especially felt there at Sugarloaf Mound, which is our relationship to the earth and sky and water.
And so tell me about was there a soundscape as well?
There was a soundscape. And so, one thing that I was very excited about was that my son chose to use the voice of our relative, our Aunt Lottie Shankamola, who was instrumental in keeping our language alive. She was one of the handful of people, probably starting in the 60s. And then, as her son became a professor at Central State University here in Oklahoma, revitalized the language. They created tapes and they had lessons and a workbook. And my son found that in my office. And so he said, "Can I use this?" And I said, "Sure." So we were able to have Aunt Lottie's voice, which I felt was really instrumental, so that people could understand, that our language has been revitalized, that our language is still with us. And this is part of that effort, that I talked about previously of helping people to understand that we are a continuum of the events and the kind of teachings and the kind of value that we thought of when we were originally at Sugarloaf Mound.
Had you and your son collaborated on an art piece before?
We did during COVID. We collaborated on a piece that was a
Oh,
community
okay.
piece.
Nice. I don't know that many mothers and sons could work for a long time together, but
I hear
congratulations.
that quite a
That's
bit,
great. I love hearing
actually. People kind of shake their head.
that. That's great.
It's really was really beautiful, though.
Oh, I bet. It's really familiar, including your aunt's voice. I wish
Hmm.
I could experience it. Speaking of experiencing it, you must have watched people, both of you, experiencing it. Could you talk about what it felt like? But some of the highlights were of seeing this site activated through this piece of art?
You want to go, James?
Yeah, I was like, I'm curious to hear your answer there. But, from my vantage point, seeing the work change through seasons, seeing it over the course of 3 months, as I would, be there, multiple days every week, I would show up, and it struck me that the kind of vision that Anita described before was so clearly evident for people that invitation to be in a space to kind of listen. The site is right along the Mississippi River. It's up on the bluffs. And like being there, it offered that sort of invitation to I think a site that people, which is both true for Osage visitors and other native visitors, as well as others, to kind of like, you don't know how to be there entirely, right? There are private homes still on top of the mound. There is this kind of awareness that you're entering a very culturally significant site. And what happened with Anita Nicosi's artwork is that it gave a kind of invitation to just sort of sit and listen and observe and kind of pay attention to where you are and think about who else has been there and think about the sort of what is being left behind as well. So I think it was a really powerful work. As in my estimation, it's honestly one of the most successful kind of public artworks that I've ever experienced, regardless of being involved in any way, because it sort of did that work of invitation and grounding for people that I have rarely experienced.
Anita, can you describe a favorite moment or a feeling?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you, James. That's very, very, very good to hear. I feel like, you saying that helps me to know that it was successful in what our efforts were. But I went there 3 or 4 times during different, you know, one time it was really hot, one time it was kind of cool. I think when we first arrived at the very beginning, at the opening, of Counterpublic, there was a tornado that evening. And so, yes, watch the elements, pass by. And I was there when there were a few visitors during the opening. I was there when a group of Native curators, artists, scholars came for some events at the Pulitzer, and we went out there all together. And it felt very emotional because most of these people I have known, for quite some time in my career, have known them quite well. And so that was kind of an emotional, moment for me. And unfortunately, I was not able to go to the closing ceremony due to COVID, and my daughter has a large scale puppet theater, and they performed there during the closing ceremonies for Counterpublic. And my
Mm.
understanding was that was quite powerful. So for me, the most emotionally engaging moments were when I would see people sitting there quietly, observing nature and also just enjoying each other's company. And of course, it was most engaging when I was able to see a group of Osage people sitting there. It was very
Mm.
touching.
This is a question for both of you. What were some kind of hidden landmines in this process that you either consciously or unconsciously avoided? What were the biggest challenges? And also, I guess, what were the biggest surprises?
So this has been, many years in the making process at this point towards the rematriation. And I think understanding that some of our initial inclinations to what, may have kind of gotten us to take action faster were the wrong impulses. So I think that some of it is like being patient with the process and kind of understanding the many different kind of levers we were involved in. So, as I mentioned, that there are private homeowners on the mound. So when we were talking about rematriation, there are different ways that can happen with a land back effort. That can be voluntary, in which, there's a choice from the property owner to give the land back. There could be governmental or public intervention, that is more like, that the people occupying the homes would have to leave. And there's sort
Kind
of
of eminent
many
domain situation.
eminent domain,
Hmm.
something like that, right? That there
Right.
there could be actions that were taken, and everything in between. There was an initial interest to do something more like a public process that we felt like St. Louisans, there was a groundswell of support towards kind of returning the mound to the Osage Nation's sovereignty. But equally, there is, I think, in St. Louis, present day, very little public awareness around the legacies and the ongoing nature of the Osage Nation. So when we were talking with Dr. Hunter and her team, I remember very clearly they were saying, that we don't want this to be a public process. We don't want it to be interpreted as kind of a tribal nation coming in and taking anyone's land. That is the sort of worst case scenario. And so some of those things around like how much we talk about it publicly, what sorts of like, let's say a public petition or things that were more like get people involved in the process were actually not possible and not of interest, that they were kind of the wrong type of strategy. What it meant is that it had to be a kind of one-on-one relationship with the property owners and the kind of work to get them to a point in which they could agree to also take action. That not only did they feel like it was the right thing to sell or transfer their home, but that they would take that step and actually do something. That ultimately was, I would say, 2/3 of the time, it was waiting on that moment in which the kind of slow stewardship of those relationships led to that action. So we're now a couple months past the point where we've announced that Joan Heckenberg, the woman who grew up on the mound, she has signed a transfer agreement. She had always said that was that she believed the right thing to do, but there was a gap between, let's say, that belief and taking a step to actually do something. So she took action, and then kind of subsequently, as we were preparing to announce that, in the city of St. Louis, the mayor and board of aldermen had also committed to kind of publicly supporting the sovereignty of the mound and the Osage Nation's plan for Sugarloaf Mound for the first time in the city's history. Those things came together where the final property owners, the Kappa Psi fraternity, also agreed to sell and vacate, and we're still working out the details, but likely by the end of this school year. So, those things all came together and kind of like there were landmines throughout, but it was really sort of trusting that kind of individuals would decide to take action.
But then we bring in the element of art. And when we often don't think of art as having that kind of power, all of the ways of going about doing this, as James was also talking about, was that, public hearings and this kind of thing. But art, is so powerful, just like that site is so powerful that we kind of don't know what we're entering into many times. Myself, when I don't quite understand everything about what it is I'm going to create for something, but I believe in the power of art, and I know that it's going to show me what to do. I know that if I begin and I just stay on this road, that it will reveal itself to me. And I feel like this is the process. This is what happened. And because art is a very safe way of entering into something that is very difficult to talk about many times, I feel like this was instrumental in helping all of these entities into coming into a decision that would be beneficial for everybody.
Well, you just answered my next question, which was why is art instrumental to this kind of action? It lets you speak about what is difficult to speak about. And I guess it also facilitates those communications, that trust that James was talking about, right?
I think it's also just sort of futuring work and imaginative work. And, going back to Anita and Nikosi's kind of installation at the site specifically, it did create this sort of connection back to sort of listen and feel the ancestors who had built and occupied that space, but also it was a very present, visceral experience. I kept using the word invitation. I remember, Anita, you speaking about it. It was kind of like it was an image. Those platforms came kind of like you visualized it and we're like,
Hmm.
that is what I need to make for this site.
Hmm.
And built that. And that sort of moment of creation and imagination and sort of visualizing it, I think that also created like other people being able to sort of imagine a different future for the site too. I think that that's very specifically kind of part of the creative process.
Hmm.
What advice would you have for anyone around the globe who's listening to this who is involved or thinking of getting involved in a land back action, specifically about incorporating art and artists in the process?
I mean, I can say that for one, it's just an invitation to action, that you can take action. And, you know, specifically for arts organizations and exhibitions that kind of incorporate Native artists or talk about themes of land back or rematriation or sovereignty, that really, I think alongside that, you know, part of our aim with Counterpublic was kind of connecting that sort of, let's say, symbolic and cultural conversation to tangible action. So I think that is more of a kind of, you know, as museums and universities and galleries kind of speak about these issues, to kind of go further, whether that is land back, whether that is direct support of Native artists and tribal nations and other communities. I think that kind of going beyond just the maybe initial safer thing of the exhibition. Yeah, I mean, I think we can always take action. And I think that that's the lesson, is sort of like show up and see what is needed and what can be done and start there. Assume that you can do something as opposed to sort of feeling powerless to kind of act.
Anita?
Um, I think, yeah, show up is a great word, and be ready to work together, be open to everybody's ideas. I think if you're looking to work with Native communities and Native artists, that you think about somebody who is connected to their community and who is also going to consider, everybody else's voices within their community, not just their own, because this doesn't singularly, belong to me. It belongs to everyone, from home. And, I can speak from personal experience that actually on a cold spring day last year, Dr. Hunter had another group go, to that site. And there were many people who had never been there. And so, they were quite overwhelmed, to be there. So the work is so significant and important that,
Hmm.
yes, you need to show up with your best thoughts and your best intentions.
What is next on your respective creative plates?
Right now, I'm preparing to go to San Antonio in Texas to Art Pace for a residency where I will be creating a large scale installation based on Osage worldview, like I spoke of earlier. And it will be a transparent house that will be hang from the ceiling and is inclusive of those kinds of things that I was talking about, and memory, based on personal memory of the older people that I grew up with when Osage language was their first language.
James, what about you and your own art making?
Yeah, I think for me, the maybe primary creative activity I have and am interested in is really like kind of imaginatively thinking about the forms of our institutions. So it's almost like other people have described it as like an institutional practice. I have a tendency to kind of make and remake the context for other creative practices. So what's really resonated with me is I've just been thinking about this question, kind of like, what do exhibitions do? What can they make happen in the world? And I think this is one of those tangible moments that, you know, we entered it with clear intention of what we wanted to do, but it kind of has gone so much further than I ever expected, that it's, I think, for me, really shaping how I think about making exhibitions, making organizations capable of carrying this kind of work. Because I really do think that's the work of the moment, it's the work of the future, and is the most creatively interesting thing in my current practice.
If you'd like to read this interview and see images of Anita Nokosi's installation, just go to uncsa.edu/artrestart. Our interview is also full of useful hyperlinks so you can learn more about things and people we talk about. Our theme music is by Shanghai Restoration Project. I'm Piercarlo Talenti, and on behalf of the Thomas S. Keenan Institute for the Arts at the University of North Carolina School of the Arts, thank you for listening.